Quick announcement. Well, one, it's day 8 or 9 or 20,000. We're coming to the deep pocket of the residency. Um, which is so exciting because the most amazing things happen at this point. Um, Tonight, we have moved, you all probably saw the email, but for those of you in Portland or planning on being in the building tonight, well, one, I hope you're in the building because the low residency MFA exhibitions are opening. And that includes Roz Stranger's installation, This Untellable Instant, which will be in the Lemelson. And there's from 5 to 8. I mean, there's food. There's food, and it's like good food. And there's a DJ and all sorts of cool stuff. Yeah, we love free food. So that's from 5 to 8. You can come, and then amidst that at 6 o'clock, we've moved Brandon Shimoda's reading to room 410 to give it a quieter space. Because of the DJ. And so Brandon's reading is going to be at 410. Before we do that, we're going to remember Tyrone Williams, who passed. So we're going to take about 10 minutes, and some of Tyrone's past students are going to talk, and then one of Tyrone's dear friends, Janice Lee, the writer Janice Lee is also going to talk. And then Brandon will read and then be in conversation with Dow. So that will be upstairs, room 410. So that's just a little bit of a room change for y'all. This is our last faculty talk, and get ready for Matt Hart.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all. I am going to try and let's see, drop a file into the chat. I'm really glad to be here. And I've written a prologue for this talk. I want to say that if I begin and things seem strange or off, that is as it should be. So there's no need to interrupt. I have not made a mistake, or I have only made mistakes. That document I put in the chat, the prologue, if you want to open that and follow along, you can. My talk is in 2 parts. It's the prologue and then the talk. Actually, maybe there'll be a 3rd part. We'll see. So the talk is called Everything Cool Begins. Prologue. The talk which I will give today is, among other things, the precipitate of a reading and writing practice that has occupied me for the last nearly 30 years. The talk concerns many subjects: language, the nature of various forms, including talks, poems, and letters, process, formal wobble, memory, expression, the definition of a minor poet, imagery, autobiographical writing, jigsaw puzzles, social media, etc. I have written down all of this as one long lineated stanza, which in fact looks something like a lot of my poems, though I am insistent that it is not a poem. It is in fact a talk, among other things. Structurally, the poem talk moves from topic to topic, idea to idea in a roughly herky-jerky fashion. Sometimes there will be several lines that address the same topic, while sometimes I make a sudden change, jumping from one topic, one idea, one image to another. It was my intention at first to bring all of this together in a talk whose form I imagined differently at different times, but what I wanted was for the talk to be written in complete sentences and paragraphs, like this prologue, and to cohere, even if it wasn't strictly speaking coherent. After several unsuccessful attempts to hammer my results together into such a whole, I realized that I should never succeed. The best that I could write would never be more than roughly improvisatory daily poem disguised as a talk. My ideas were soon enough boring to me if I tried to force them on in any single direction against their natural inclinations. And this was, of course, connected to the very nature of the process itself and with the deficits of my writing. It seems I am at every turn compelled to travel over a vast, wild field, zigzagging, as it were, from one thing to another. There is a very important sense in which I didn't write the talk at all. The talk wrote itself, and the talk wrote me via my reading and writing and life. I am, in some sense, only its conduit. Perhaps it is the talk's hope that it will write you as well. I should be upfront in saying the talk was written in one 2-hour period with at least one coffee break. That is, in any case, the apocryphal version I will tell. As with my previous talks, the same or almost the same points are always being approached afresh each morning, sometimes with coffee and grapefruit, at others a handful of vitamins and a hangover. This talk, like the others, really only spins its wheels in a process of coming to be on repeat. Very much of the time, and even in this particular talk, I fail to come to the point or to have a point at all. The hallmark, perhaps, of being in too big a hurry, or of being too much in the present, or of being in ecstasis. This talk is really many talks at once, or it's the beginning of one talk, which I hope to someday finish, or that you may finish yourselves. One good thing is, like all of us, it does eventually end, and that is the talk's great promise. Up until a few days ago, I intended to give the talk Many a Meditative Hour. The description of that talk, which some of you possibly read, went like this: Many a meditative hour. This narrative talk will deliberately and seriously slow everything down to, the cliche would be, a snail's pace. So, to a snail's pace. Besides the necessary slowness and cliche, we will also be focusing our lights on narrative itself, sentimentality, and the fact that we die. Nevertheless, this is a talk about writing. The title is from Wordsworth. Many a meditative hour is, as the title description says, a narrative, though lineated, about a garden snail named William Wordsworth, who lives in a glass terrarium on a window ledge in a house with 2 adults, a child, and a dog named Samuel Taylor Coleridge. I allowed certain of my friends to read this talk over the last several weeks, and the reactions were extreme. Either they were moved to tears or reviled the meandering grind of the non-plot. Many had questions about a narrative that seemingly had no conflict. Many objected to the asides on poetics and poets like Frank O'Hara, William Wordsworth, and my late mentor, Dean Young, the asides getting in the way of the story. This made me nervous. So I scrapped the talk and woke up just 2 days ago to the talk that I will deliver shortly, titled Everything Cool Begins. That said, in the last several days, it seemed that it might be a good idea to give both talks, as the former might be better understood against the backdrop of the latter. But given the page count of the 2 talks together, more than 30 pages, and the length of this prologue, giving both talks together would not be possible. I had made so many mistakes in putting all of this together. There's a sense in which the whole of both talks might be summarized as a list of errata. Fortunately, I was helped to realize my mistakes to a degree which I am hardly able to estimate by the aforementioned unnamed friends and via the talks of Pupe Masagi, Dow Strom, Stephanie Adams Santos, Vicky Now, and Alejandro de Acosta, not to mention also the discussions with the students in mine and Alejandro's workshop, Amelia Bennett, Anastasia Razumov, Acela Kemper, Kyle Knutson, and Christina Van Dexter. I am indebted to all of you and Jay Ponteri for the most consequential of the thoughts presented in Everything Cool Begins. However, none of this is your fault. For more than one reason, the talk I give today will have points of contact with what other people have already talked about at the residency and even with some of the poems I read at my reading. If my talk does not bear a stamp of the new newness, I do not wish to claim that the notes I will share are in any sense significant. I give this talk with doubtful feelings. It is not impossible that the talk will open someone's eyes or heart or writing practice or relationship to what a talk on such an occasion as this one might be, especially with all its defects and in the darkness of our time. But of course, it is not likely. I should not like any talk I give to spare other people the trouble of thinking in writing and of cohering where possible, if yet, nevertheless, they be incoherent. Rather, I would like to stimulate others to work of their own, perhaps even before I conclude, to stop listening and begin instead to write their own much better talk. I should have liked to have written a good talk. This has not come about, but the time has passed in which I could improve it. Westwood, Cincinnati, June 2024. Everything cool begins with not knowing and a strategy to get lost in language, not, as a lot of people imagine, with an idea or a feeling or a memory. Occasionally, there's something worth contemplating or feeling deeply, or yes, remembering, but most often I would rather be present on the page and moving my dim-wit word spirit across the lines via the energy of neurons firing and their electrical avant-charge hum canceling the past, but not only the past, the future. There is no future, the Sex Pistols said prophetically before global capital swallowed their revolt and made them a product to be consumed like everything else. If the past is subject to the distortions of regret and nostalgia, then the future is subject to the distortions of hope and dread. Everything gets recycled and replayed in a back and forward wash of money and the ways it's related to what has been and what might be. In writing, expression becomes content the instant it's in words. So maybe to avoid it, we should hide our inner lives, shepherd our inmost souls, write about the world through the eye and not about the I. And yet, as the poet Norman Finkelstein notes in a review of the work of the poet Peter Gizzi, quote, the more the poet seeks to escape lyrical self-expression and become a vehicle for the outside, the more the outside demands a painfully personal song, unquote. One who writes wants and needs to write, to share, to express. But what's required if one wants to be taken seriously is a song drenched in the specifics of particular experience, the chairs and knives and day-glow yellow balloons, the red moss on the walls, the imperfect stains of grass, bacon grease, refractions of light, errands to run, not to mention transcriptions of the real conversations of people, joy and awe and our human discomfort, not the saccharine and otherwise reductive abstractions of our experiential predicament, not a history lesson, but a present tense presence. Currently, in my real actual life, I need to write my friend Paige a letter that she's expecting because I told her I was going to write her one. And now I think this is the letter, but it's also a talk about something that hasn't as yet come into clear focus, and maybe it never will, and maybe that it doesn't will be part of the point, which is cool. To write in one sitting a talk, which is a poem and now also a letter to Paige, is cool. Paige herself is cool. A painter, a reader, a runner, a mother. Dear Paige, these are some things I need to say to you and some other people ASAP. But while I'm doing that, I'm also going to make another cup of instant coffee. Too bad, bean snobs. My discernment is reserved for other possibilities and strategic in every good way. I can imagine being a tiny green fluff grain of pollen drifting onto the darkness of a black 2019 Honda Fit's daylight summertime furnace roof and laying there, looking up at the sun and feeling knocked out by its brightness to the point of blindness and burning myself up like a calorie in a marathon. I like that as an image. A picture made of words, a set of transformative relationships, a constellation of life notes between myself and the pollen and the Honda and the sun and the burning up urgency of continuing until not. What kind of talk can be written without a plan, without ideas or feelings or memories to carry the relative snail's pace of actual blood going round in a circle in my body, so a body going nowhere fast, which is being something more than that 2x4 my friend Blake put in his pocket in a poem, but not in his painting the way I thought he would. Get it? 2x4 wood. As always, there are these small, indelicate accidents and questions to crash among the hydrangeas in one gazelle-full blast of inspiration, which is a byproduct of the strategy of getting words on the page in some disorder and wanting to understand how this morning it feels prescient to whisper the word prescient and say that what's much more important than what we understand is what we don't understand, which is almost everything, and should be a context to revel in and achieve something revelatory, but also totally mysterious. Like how all of a sudden we, that is me and my family, here at 3127 Manning Avenue, Cincinnati, Ohio, 45211, are visited every morning at the kitchen window by a cardinal stopping by, or so it seems, to say hi. You probably already know, because I assume that everyone knows a hell of a lot more than I do, that a cardinal is a kind of perching songbird that expresses sexual dimorphism. So the vibrant red Catholicism of the bird who visits us means it's a dude bird on its way to push the baby stroller and let the dingus dog out to run around until his jaws slack with drool and his tongue lolls almost to the summer grass. Pink as a star sinking into a glass of milk, or the guts of that silverfish I just brought the hammer down on with my size 11 Adidas soccer shoes because it crawled onto my ankle with its, no exaggeration, 40 million legs. I don't like being a murderer, but crawling up on me crosses a line in the poem, which is a talk and a letter and my life. And lucky for me, maybe the coolest thing ever, or a total disappointment, or both at the same time. Maybe this next line is a long, dumb, graceful, cluttered one, like in Ted Berrigan's Old-Fashioned Air, where he mourns his friend Lee Crabtree, who has recently committed suicide by talking to Lee as if he's right there and not gone. Quote, "And we are back where we started from, Lee, you and me, alive and well," unquote. Or maybe the line, my line, is just one that goes like an electron in and out of existence through the vast via the void, but only in the motion's sickness. I do feel a little ill about all of this. Perhaps I should have started with some actual aesthetic questions that I wanted to answer rather than just a desire to dive into the language improvisationally because I can and because I haven't before, and most importantly, because I think it's cool, by which I mean joyful and serious, not a kind of detachment. This is cool, right? Sometimes you keep one sentence or train of thought or a scene or a seance going just to see where it might lead you or who might suddenly speak up. And if it doesn't lead you anywhere, or it's silence and candlelight surrounded by darkness, at least you did your work. You can ask what it is or name it or diagnose it later, but in the middle, you rock it. Poems are a matter of beginnings and ends. Middles are muddles or bridges or amplifiers. Suddenly it got loud in here. Agnes, turn down the Taylor Swift. So much for peace and quiet. The air is full of disturbance to transcribe. And this reminds me, and thus I'm being led by the words on the page to this quote from off the page in a poem by the Slovenian poet Tomáš Šalamun that goes, quote, poetry doesn't contribute to peace of any kind. It contributes to explosions and pain, unquote. Yes, I think it's a matter of the extremes of all our human weather, nothing in tranquility, recollected or otherwise. Poetry is agitation and glimmer, or as my friends in the band R-Ring put it, a kind of glitter vomit, something at once both acidy and with sparks, pressing its urgent little or gargantuan face against the window of experience via language, similar to that cardinal I mentioned earlier with its song at our kitchen window, or like this moment, writing and simultaneously reading an essay and realizing, holy shit, I'm a minor poet, which Norman Finkelstein, in a different review from the one I mentioned earlier, this one on Pinte, the Book of Woe by John Wieners, defines as, quote, one for whom the notion of a career is alien to the writing of the poems by a destitute and abject figure who is broken but paradoxically inspired by need, unquote. I think I feel that technically, or that I am technically myself in it, and technically that quote isn't from Norman. It's Norman, who I know personally, by the way, which is why I can call him Norman, quoting Jennifer Soong. So credit where credit's due. Minor or not, major or not. Quote, the art is in the arrangements, unquote. Anselm Berrigan wrote me an email, though that quote wasn't technically in the email. It's from his book, Something for Everybody, which is the way I want this poem, talk, letter to page and all of you to be. I will admit that it's weird to be attempting this simultaneity. The poet Bernadette Mayer was at one point in the 70s so wildly behind on her correspondence that she wrote one letter to the 15 people she owed a letter to as if they were all one person. In the process, she addressed and answered questions each of them had asked her in their previous individual letters to her, but she did it seamlessly without acknowledging who, in any given instance, she was indirectly addressing. So everybody who received the letter received the responses to everybody's individual letters. For example, she begins, quote, thanks so much for the loofah and the golden seal tea, unquote. And then a little later, quote, we never go to the movies, so don't feel bad. The last time we went, the bus had broken down and the film wasn't there, unquote. It's unclear if these comments are responses to the same person. She also writes in the same letter, quote, I don't think Ted is a reactionary influence. He's just full of reactions. But if you want to complain about the structure of St. Mark's, I'll be the first to join in. That's what's reactionary, unquote. And that's followed 2 sentences later by, quote, what can you do? Your dream about the gangbang is incredible, but I must disagree about dying. I've died a lot in dreams. Nothing Ruth says about poets is really totally right anyway. And actually, one thinks, or I do, almost constantly about death, unquote, etc. It must have been disorienting to write that letter, but especially to receive it. It's full of poetry gossip and personal detail. I wonder if it was embarrassing to anyone, a poetics of oversharing. In that spirit, I went to my friend Kim's studio the other day and looked at his new paintings and talked over beers about Jack Spicer's notion that, quote, things do not connect, they correspond, unquote. And how we're always trying to up the ante on ourselves and not get stuck in the weeds of the things we've already done. Kim and his wife Carolyn just went to Slovenia, so I mentioned to him the Tomáš Šalamun quote above about how poetry doesn't contribute to peace of any kind, but to explosions and pain, and how as a result of reading his new selected Kiss the Eyes of Peace, translated by Brian Henry, that I've come to the conclusion that Tomáš's early work is so much more experimental than his later work, even though his later work is full of the disjunction, fragmentation, and surreal imagery that he became known for. The difference is that in the early work, he's applying so many cool strategies for making poems, repetition, question answer, the oddity of angular forms, textual noise, juxtaposition, conversation poems, both with himself and anyone else he felt like talking to. In other words, there was seemingly so much more at stake for Tomás Chalamun in poetry when he didn't know that he was Tomás Chalamun. Once he settled into that, which sounds harsher than I mean it, the poems became a ribbon of noise and disruption, but minus the experimentation that makes the early work so compelling. For example, in one of the later poems, I didn't write down which one, they all kind of blend together. He writes, quote, "The oar spins like straw in a chicken's ass. The parishioners have curly hair," unquote. That juxtaposition is hilarious and run on and absurd, kind of zany. It's all the things I've come to love about Tomáš's work, but while it's enigmatic and disjunctively extreme, it's also significantly typical for him. So not very surprising the way his early work is. When surprise becomes expected, it's not surprising anymore. It's wallpaper, which is the stuff people put on their walls so that no one will notice the walls. You glance at it once, get immediately the pattern, and move on. I hope that I have not settled into being Matt Hart, but only some other future Matt Hart can be the judge, or you, dear reader, dear listener, dear friend. Only you can prevent forest fires. What? Anyway, one of Kim's new paintings that kept drawing me in has this fuzzed out spray painted black oval over the top of his other more defined, clashing, and exuberantly colorful forms. These are big paintings, by the way, 4 by 5 feet at least. I kept looking into that oval like it was a mirror, hoping to see myself, and I did, but weirdly, I looked like Kim, and Kim looked right through me, which was cool. He made a self-portrait and painted me into it, or so I imagined, free associating and daydreaming while Kim was talking about not really having an idea for this new body of work, the way in the past there was always some anchor. The sirens, the muses, the fates, and the hours, or the fall of Hyperion, or the Eleusinian mysteries. And yet that fizzy black oval seemed to me like a big step forward in his work, possibly a new beginning, even though he couldn't see it. But in it, I could see both of us and felt surprised by it. I told him this, so if I know Kim, he's already painted it out. That's puzzling, and his paintings often look like puzzles. Or maybe I just want to compare art's complexity in general to the art of the puzzle. I'm thinking right now about jigsaw puzzles in particular. They're abstract, colorful pieces which, when assembled correctly, create an image unlike any of the individual pieces. Although, wouldn't it be cool to make a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces assembled correctly just made another jigsaw puzzle piece that was part of a much larger jigsaw puzzle composed of pieces made of other smaller jigsaw puzzle pieces? You can read all about jigsaw puzzles and begin to think of them as a metaphor for pretty much every complex set of spatial or temporal relationships that combine to make a larger whole, either physically or via our imaginations, in George Perec's Life, a User's Manual. I'm thinking, for example, of the individual rooms in a skyscraper, the individual parts of a Patriot missile, the stock market, a recipe for angel food cake, the grains of sand that make up a beach, even my parents, who I don't really talk to or have any kind of clear relationship with, but a relationship by blood nevertheless, and we add up to a family, if only nominally. Jigsaw puzzles add up differently than that. Perec puts it this way: the art of jigsaw puzzling begins with wooden puzzles cut by hand, whose maker undertakes to ask himself all the questions the player will have to solve, and instead of allowing chance to cover his tracks, aims to replace it with cunning, trickery, and subterfuge, unquote. Please note, 1, making a jigsaw puzzle in this way is strategic, and 2, significantly, the kind of jigsaw puzzles Perec is talking about here are one-of-a-kind creations that don't come with a picture on the box. You have no idea what you're doing. There is no reference for how to live and what to do. You don't know if the puzzle is a realist image of a garden snail named William Wordsworth or Jackson Pollock's 1947 painting Lucifer. The puzzle maker's job is to make solving it as difficult as possible. Similarly, making paintings or writing poems or stories is hard if one wants to make art that's surprising to oneself and others because there is no picture on the box to begin with. There's the history of art as examples of things that have already been done, but thinking about those things in relation to one's own new work is a matter of craft. That is everything that's already been explored and plotted, articulated, and mapped. Craft can be taught, art, not so much. To get out from under the weightiness of craft, of history, and the way things have previously been done requires some, quote, cunning, trickery, and subterfuge, unquote. Not as a way of being puzzling to someone else, but as a way of puzzling and surprising oneself. We provide the keys to the vault. Minor poets, on your marks, get set, go. We, me, and a lot of my friends aren't celebrities, but we keep showing up and doing the work because the work is getting the words out of the woods and seeing the forest for the trees, marching on the castle where all the celebrity poets live to apply and submit. Mic drop. Mic drops are cool. Also, manuscript contests are stupid. Does everything have to be a football game? Welcome to neoliberalism and the wreckage of trickle-down economics, and more recently, the ongoing wreckage and re-wreckage of social media, where the South Korean-born German philosopher Byung-Chul Han argues that even our selfies are pornographic in the ways they reduce us to a likeness, an image to be liked, one to be consumed as easily as possible. He calls this an effect of the aesthetics of the smooth, which he writes in his book, Saving Beauty, is, quote, the signature of the present time. It connects the sculptures of Jeff Koons, iPhones, and Brazilian waxing, unquote. The beauty of the smooth, he notes, quote, reflects a general imperative. It embodies today's society of positivity. What is smooth does not injure, nor does it offer any resistance. It is looking for like. The smooth object deletes its against. Any form of negativity is removed, unquote. You can follow me at Forklift Matt and follow my band at Never Knew Band. I find being followed both alarming and vaguely exciting. In her new book, Being Reflected Upon, where the being of the title functions as both subject and object, Alice Notley writes in as unsmooth a way as possible that these days, quote, everyone prefers being alarmed about politics to poetry, and that's a mistake, unquote. I couldn't agree and disagree more. But art isn't something that one agrees or disagrees with, like a political poster or a restaurant choice or a belief system. Art condemns or pardons us, arrests or rejects our premises and conclusions, challenges every day with eternity and the mysteries in our blood at the limits of language. Art says, change your life, Theodore Roethke said, quoting Rainer Maria Rilke, who was probably quoting the Big Bang. Art demands that we wake up and see, that we be seers. I really believe in this. And oh yeah, I just remembered, apropos of something I was going to mention earlier in relation to memory. I've become remarkable at not remembering things, which is not the same as forgetting them. I know because I am wildly haunted by the past and the things that I can't remember, but that I'm certain I should. And also I am haunted by the present right this minute and the future, which is my end. Forgetting puts things at a distance, leaves things in the dust. Not remembering means that we are aware we have forgotten, and that forgottenness, whether we remember it consciously or not, is still operating like a virus in the background. Maybe that distinction doesn't make any sense, but I am worried about it in my poems. What am I leaving out, which is nevertheless ever present? I know I'm leaving out a lot. I know too that a lot of my memories never really happened. Often things I remember cannot be corroborated, or someone else remembers them in an entirely different way, or I merely dreamed them or made them up deliberately to make myself look cool at a party or as part of a poem, talk, letter, improvisation. My bad memory is a vivid marker for me, an awareness of the precarious predicament of consciousness and identity, and eventually the loss of both. Memory, as Joe Brainerd showed us in his great novel, epic poem, memoir, self-portrait, I Remember, is often what informs, via its accumulation, who we are, our biographies, politics, beliefs, values, aesthetics. But when I look in the mirror of this poem, talk, letter, improvisation later, I can almost guarantee that I will not recognize the person speaking and that I will have forgotten almost everything in it. The speaker will be somewhat familiar to me, but also entirely other than me. Who else feels this way? Who else can't remember but knows that they can't? Who else is lost in the language to be read? Quote, we must lose ourselves in the indecipherable, unquote. The poet Noel Cocott wrote and maybe said somewhere. I have taken her advice, and I am right now delighted and tired and bored with this. But, quote, when sparks flash in the depths of your life, like a painting in a dreary museum, you've got to get as close to it as you can, unquote. That's Apollinaire. It's translated by David Lehman to make it possible for those of us who don't read French to relate to his poetry in English. When I read, my mind is active. My body is in the background. I am aware that the words are words and the word squirrel is nothing like a squirrel and I am nothing like Matt Hart. Nevertheless, I am reflecting something or I am being reflected. Certainly when I'm writing, I am being written. Meaning accumulates. Life accumulates, but nothing is stagnant. Not even the accumulation. Everything keeps changing, transforming. One can read for sense or politics or to stave off human estrangement. One can read for paradise, the mysterious bullshit of being alive. I play among the text, but I am also flooded by them, so drown in every book. Here, I am giving something of myself and to you, but I am also giving up the ghosts, if nothing else, throwing up my hands, not really knowing where I'm going or when this is or where we've been. The end of Emily Hall's novel, The Long Cut, which is, as all artists know, the opposite of a shortcut, may be instructive here. Quote, I had run through the grid to a familiar place and found chaos there. I had traveled away from my syntax and got back with the loop or the spiral taking me the long way, the loop getting me back. What was important was not to find the right words. And I want to add, to take the time necessary to not find them deliberately, to deliberately not find them, to deliberately keep looking. Sit down in the language and surprise who you are. Everything cool begins. Be cool. With joy and with seriousness. Be cool. Paige, be cool. Dear ones, be cool. I am not cool, but I am certain I am trying in every sense, and I am yours in not knowing, and all the possibilities inside us, out beyond us. These are not the right words, or not enough of them, surely. But now, at least, I feel lost to begin. Everything cool becomes a strategy unhinged. I am yours in the wreckage. Big love. Dear Matt. This is the last poem that my mentor, Dean Young, sent me in August of 2022, 3 days before he died. And when I finished writing the talk I just presented, I thought of this poem for some reason, maybe because I felt like I needed to be rescued. Um, but the poem's called Rescue Mission. Rescue Mission. I don't know what to do any more than you do. When the snow globe starts filling with ash. Now, Scarecrow, that's your face in my mirror. There was a puny rescue zoo at the back of the park in my hometown. Shabby, a bit scary, underfunded. One old toothless bear in a concrete pit. Shiny eyes, shiny nose, mumbling Hungarian in the dark, and about 6 monkeys masturbating constantly behind the chicken wire and a cage where a kangaroo died. What is it that's always burning on this earth? There's something gauzy, smelling more and more strawberry the more it's stretched. I don't think anyone has a clue how to rescue anything. A bear, a monkey, a kangaroo not even there. The heart being lifted up in talons, the eye in the diamond. 30,000 terracotta warriors. Egg with its tiny astronaut. Burning tree. Um, Obviously there's some time left, and I would be happy to entertain any questions, but I don't know if I can answer them.
Let's give you a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you too for sharing that poem. Any questions, observations?
I'm not sure if this is a question, but response. Something, Matt, you said the word squirrel is nothing like a squirrel, and I'm launching into poetics essay land, and something I've been working with lately is like telling too much and then overcompensating and then being like, fuck, I didn't tell you anything. There's just all of this stuff happening and I haven't grounded you anywhere. But I'm working with the idea of how like first person narration and personal narrative when telling can outdo showing. And it's that Dickens line, only my hair was drunk, that I think about. It's like you can't, nothing beats that. And so the word squirrel is nothing like a squirrel. And I was like, holy that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to find words like squirrels. Have you found words like squirrels?
Well, interestingly, this came up in, I mean, obviously they're all this sort of, onomatopoeic words that, mean what they sound like, right? But most of the time I find that, as hard as I try, as hard as we try, right? Language is one thing and the world is something else. Like language is one thing and experience is something else. And language points to experience, language points to the world. Sometimes it helps us understand certain aspects of the world, but there are always things that we experience in the world that we still don't understand, even with all the language that we have. So there's still this kind of, limit that we're up against. Funny enough, Alejandro brought up Wittgenstein's remarks in the Golden Bough yesterday, and I've always loved that Wittgenstein preface to the philosophical investigations. But I think that Wittgenstein's final remark of the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which was his first work, right, is, whereof one cannot speak, one must remain silent. And, he meant that in terms of like philosophically, in terms of a sort of perfect philosophical language, if there are aspects of being that actually can't be said in a sort of perfect logical way, then we just shouldn't speak them. But he also did think that there were mysteries, and that religious practice and that art and that music very often were things that could get at those things or point to those things or push us up against them at least enough that we could commune with them in some way. But for me, there's always kind of a barrier between words and the world. But, you know, we come back every single day to the language and sit down to try and find our way to the world and to make sense where we can. As you know, as pleasurable and as maybe as inadequate as it may be. It's, you know, I always think of language as, you know, it's the, and obviously people could argue with this idea, but I think that language is the fundamental conceptual framework by which we make sense of everything there is. And you know what I mean by that is, like, you can't imagine, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, you can't imagine something that you don't have language for. For example, even if I said, like, you know, amorphous green blob, I understand what an amorphous green blob is because I understand what those words mean, right? Like the idea that that, you know, that there's something out there that I don't have language for, something that I feel. But I also think language is the best tool I have for trying to get to that, even if the word squirrel is not a squirrel.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Anybody else have anything? I would mention that, you know, obviously I gave you the Wittgenstein and asked you to follow along, and then read you something that was like the Wittgenstein, but not exactly the Wittgenstein. Some of you know that I've been practicing a process that I call obliteration now for several years, where I take a source text, sometimes a source text that's not in English, but sometimes a source text that's in English, and I apply a variety of different processes to that as a way of reinventing it as an entirely new text. I mean, there is a sense in which it's kind of a kind of wild version of mistranslation, but in some ways it is than more than a mistranslation, because I don't always have any kind of fidelity to the original when I'm doing these things. If at any point in doing an obliteration I feel like I need to completely abandon the source text, you know, I will totally do that. Which is why I don't call it translation really, or even mistranslation, but that preface is a kind of attempt at obliterating the Wittgenstein and then setting up the entanglement that was about to ensue. So I hope that was clear, but if it wasn't, it wasn't. Everything cool begins.
Matt, let's give you a round of applause. Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Great talk this morning. Thank you all. So we have workshop in a little over an hour. We'll see you there.